We are taking time the first Sunday of every month to look at some of the history of our church during the 1930s and also some of the world, national, and local events that people in the church would have been talking about during that time. So this month we're looking at the 1930s from 1930 to 1939. The decade of the 30s was a time when the Depression, started by the Wall Street crash of 1929, affected everyone in the USA and around the world. In 1930 to 1931, over 2,500 banks in the USA failed. By 1932, over 13 million Americans were unemployed, about 25% of the population. Tens of thousands loaded up their belongings and lived in cars going from place to place, looking for work. And drought conditions and over-mechanization of farming turned much of the Midwest into a dust bowl. On November 8, 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt won in a landslide vote to become president. Around the world, radical political systems like communism, Stalinism, fascism, and Nazism gained power. On August 2, 1934, Adolf Hitler declared himself Führer of Germany after becoming president and chancellor. And 5 years later, on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, which would start World War II. Despite the Depression, technology continued to change lifestyles. The 30s saw the first tea bags, adhesive tape, magnetic recording tape, nylon, ballpoint pens, jet engines, helicopters, and a new kind of radio, frequency modulation, or FM. Rittman benefited in the 1930s from the federal works programs, as the new City Hall was built in 1936 by the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. City Hall also housed the police and fire departments. During this time in the 30s, the WPA also worked to provide Rittman one of the first lighted football fields in the area. TV8 weatherman Dick Goddard has mentioned how exciting it was to play football under the lights at Rittman. By the 1930s, the Brethren Church was becoming well established in Rittman. The church was led by Pastor Everett Neiswanger, who served the church well during those Depression years. In 1936, Brother Neiswanger resigned from the pastorate. He left many true friends. Brother Luther L. Grubb, a young recent graduate of Ashland Seminary, was called to replace Brother Neiswanger. Reverend Grubb believed the church was able to be self-supporting and should assume its obligations and become independent of the Brethren Home Missions Board. His suggestion was adopted by the membership, and the church continued to grow until it became evident that more room would be needed. This same year, the church officially honored Dorothy Franks Dowdy by voting her to the office of deaconess because she and her husband, the Reverend Paul Dowdy, had been called by the Foreign Mission Board to go to South America as Brethren missionaries. She thus became the first local missionary to be supported by the Rittman Church. The future of the church looked bright indeed, but storm clouds were beginning to gather. First of all, in late 1936, a rash of unpleasant incidents occurred in the church. Where in the past there was complete harmony among the brethren, there was now discontent and turmoil within the congregation. Then, too, in 1937, were the first hints of trouble in Ashland College and Seminary. On June 4, 1937, 2 professors were fired from Ashland College and Theological Seminary. They had been given the choice to resign or be dismissed on grounds that at the time were not altogether clear. They chose dismissal. Quietly but not without a plan, they took their leave. 2 nights before, on June 2nd, a prayer meeting convened. The 2 professors were in attendance. They knew their imperiled jobs were threatening to cause a significant rift in the Brethren Church. But rift or not, they couldn't tolerate the watering down of biblical truth that they believed was becoming epidemic at Ashland. Those 2 professors were Alva J. McClain and Herman Hoyt. They, along with an assembly of theologians, pastors, and evangelists, made 2 choices at the close of that prayer meeting. First of all, to establish a seminary that would be faithful to resolute biblical truths that define their vision of Christian higher education. and second, to separate from Ashland for good. Ron Henry, a former history teacher at Grace and dean of admissions for 36 years, remembers the adversity into which the seminary was born. Quote, "History tells us that the year 1937 was the worst year of the Depression. I can't think of a worse time to start a school in a town where these men didn't even live. They stepped out in faith and God honored it. So on July 28, 1937, Grace Theological Seminary was established with McClain as its first president at the Akron-Ellet First Brethren Church. And then in September of 1939, the campus relocated to Winona Lake, Indiana. Despite the troubles both inside and outside the church here at Rittman, people continued to come into the membership and the church moved forward. In 1938, Reverend Grubb and the official board began to make plans for additional room. The plans were presented to the membership and approved to add 6 new classrooms to the south side. And on March 8, 1939, the contract was awarded for construction. Many gifts and many hours of volunteer labor kept the cost of this addition to a minimum. In 1939, the church, along with around 75 other Brethren churches, ceased affiliation with Ashland College and Seminary and joined the new Grace Brethren movement. We can truly be thankful for God guiding the church safely during this decade of turmoil and trouble.